Indeed. Thank you so much. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Natalia, Francesca. It's great to have Sanofi and Amiral here joining this discussion and opening the day for health innovators of the Global Webit Impact Week. Don't forget, #Webit and use the phenomenal platform to network and to share and to ask questions and be part of the solution. Thanks for being with us. Going next, nutrition as a very important part of the health, and a great panel discussion on revolutionizing global food system by Agtech and food innovation. We have Francis Koo, correspondent and producer at CGTN America. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Francis Koo. I'm a correspondent and producer at CGTN America, which is an international television station in Washington, D.C., where I'm talking to you from. And I'm thrilled that Webit invited me to be a moderator on this panel discussion focused on a very timely and a very important topic, that is revolutionizing the global food system through Agtech and food innovation. Very timely and very important topic. And we have two very distinguished panelists who are very well versed on this issue. First, I'd like to introduce JD Rossouw. He is the Senior Vice President and Head of Vegetables Research and Development at Bayer Crop Science. And Sam Kass, he is with the Acre Venture Partners, a venture capital firm with an emphasis on health and environmental issues in the food system. I want to thank you both for joining our discussion today.
Thank you for having us.
Well, first of all, I'd like to start with a very daunting statistic. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and forgive me for reading down a little bit, but I want to make sure I get the statistic right. The global population is expected to rise to more than 9 billion people by the year 2050. And to feed this growing number, we as a global community will need to increase food production by 50%, 50%. So certainly time is not on our side. We have less than 30 years to go on this. First of all, let me start with you, JD. You work in vegetables research and development at Bayer Crop Science, as I mentioned. Can you talk about some of the initiatives your company has been focusing on when it comes to this particular issue? And I also want to add that the pandemic has also made this issue even more urgent. So if you could talk about some of the specifics that Bayer has done, the measures Bayer has taken to address these issues.
Well, Francis, thanks a lot for the question. So it's something that is really important. And as a company, we've been really focused on the last few years. And also, as you mentioned, COVID-19 sort of accelerated our discussions around what we can help as in the industry as a partner to address some of the food challenges that we will have over the next decade plus. But before I get there, is just to reflect, I grew up on a farm in South Africa and I still have connections there. So a lot of my questions and my answers will be focused on reflecting as I put my shoes into my family farm, the way I grew up, and also the fact that I worked most of my career in the developing world around the world. So if I then think about food security, if you think about developing countries and underdeveloped countries, it really comes down to access to healthy food, making sure that we actually get the food from the farm to the end consumer and making sure it's healthy, nutritious, and we'll be able to deliver on that commitment. And COVID-19 taught us a lot about disruptions in that value chain and getting from the farm to the kitchen, the food that we actually consume on a daily basis. In Bayer Crop Sciences, we are a life sciences company. We focus on both the human health component of what we do for our pharmaceutical and consumer health business, but also focusing on the ag space to be able to focus on innovation within the crop sciences space to, again, bring healthy food and products to market through our growers around the world, both small and large scale growers. Our strategy has really evolved the last few years to say we're going to focus to what we call to on and beyond the farm, making sure that we bring, again, products, our seed products and our chemistry products and our biologics products to our growers making sure that we enable a digital platform and then also allow that fruit and crops to actually follow through the value chain to the end consumer, whether that's for animal feed, for fiber, for fuel, or in the case of the discussion today, nutritious vegetables and fruit. The things that we've put in place is to step back and say, every single innovation that we do in Bayer Crop Sciences needs to be linked to a sustainability component. We know that climate change is really creating a lot of challenges out there for our growers around the world. And it's a little bit different if you step into different parts of the world and what those challenges are. And for us as a company and being part of the industry and a partner is helping solve those specific challenges for our growers around the world. One thing we do know is that climate change is is challenging us from an environment perspective much more frequent. And those disruptions are much more significant. Even if you look back to when I grew up on our family farm, those distractions on droughts, extreme weather conditions are much, much more intense. So we need to develop products and address those challenges on a much shorter time frame than what we used to in the ag space. So a couple of quick things that we do in Bayer Crop Sciences to help address. And again, I want to call out that we're not the only player in this space. It's all about partnerships, collaborations, and working as an industry to solve these things. But a couple of things that we believe we can help and play a significant part as a big corporation within the crop sciences and ag space is we invest about 2 billion euros yearly in our R&D pipeline to bring products to market. And our deliverable is products to growers and then beyond the farm. We have a very, very clear focus the last 2 to 3 years around sustainability. We've got 3 commitments. We want to reduce greenhouse gases by 30% by 2030. We want to reduce the environmental impact of crop protection by 30% by 2030. And we want to reach and help smallholder farmers, about 100 million smallholder farmers over the next decade, to produce crops as a business in a much more sustainable way and help educate and train these growers to better use products out there. And the last 2 things is we focus around innovation, and every single innovation that we're trying to put in place is really driven from a sustainability focus and lens. And the last thing is we're also using digital transformation, data science, machine learning to create a platform to help our growers, whether you're a large scale grower with huge equipment or a smallholder farmer in Africa that has the basic input cost, making sure that we use data and science to help you also and a digital platform to deliver your products to the market and get a fair price.
JD, I'm glad you mentioned climate change as well, because that has been an issue for a long time. And that, along with the pandemic, is just exacerbating some of these issues. Sam, I want to turn to you and focus the same question on you. What does Acre Venture Partners, what is it doing to address some of these issues of food sustainability and security?
Well, helping to solve climate change and producing a food system that is nourishing all of us is the very reason that Acre exists. We're a fundamentally mission-driven fund investing in companies that are trying to solve some of the biggest problems that humanity faces. And food and agriculture sort of sit, at the crosshairs of climate. It's the number 2 driver of climate change and number 1 driver of environmental degradation globally. It takes 70% of the world's water, drives most of the deforestation and land use around the globe. We have drained our aquifers on a global basis. We're losing soil at just absolutely alarming rates. And so food is really driving, as well as, let's not forget, it is the number 1 cause of preventable death and disease in the United States. There's over 2 billion people globally overweight or obese and over 800 million people malnourished, undernourished. And that number, although we made a ton of progress on that actually over the last couple of decades, we're now, in a real threat of that number starting to go up again. And food is driving a lot of this. On the other hand, as Diddy was pointing out, it's also on the front lines of the impact of climate. And just maintaining the status quo, which I would argue is completely unacceptable today, is going to be very difficult. And so, but what I guess what excites me about the moment is I also think that food and agricultural systems are the way we can solve these challenges. We're investing in technologies that help, looking at making sure a company called Lone Bio that has a platform and identify microbes in soil that can sequester large amounts of carbon in much more permanent forms in the soil. So producers don't have to transform everything that they do, but can start actually on a global basis at massive scale, start sequestering real carbon out of the air and putting it back in the ground where it belongs. So we see opportunities, in food and ag to solve some of these challenges, but we have a lot more work to do. Quite frankly, the space is wildly underinvested, given that it's the largest industry in the world. More people are in food and ag than any other industry. It's the basis of life. And there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of exciting things happening. But, we're out of time. We've been talking about this for decades. Quite frankly, in the conversation around climate, food is still kind of an afterthought. Even I was at COP21, kind of trying to bang a drum around food and agriculture. And at 26, it was definitely more of a topic, but still small compared to the issues that that we're dealing with. So we have a lot of work to do to really unlock the potential of food and agricultural systems to solve these challenges that we face.
Speaking of a lot of work to do, Sam, if I could continue with you, you know this topic very well in terms of nutrition because you were a senior policy advisor on nutrition under the Obama administration. It is so important, not just for the private sector like Acre, like Bayer, to play a role in addressing these issues, but we also need governments. We need, powerful countries to do their part in addressing these concerns. And so I want to ask you kind of the current state of food policy in your opinion, and what more needs to be done. What is the one or two things that governments need to do to better address these issues of food sustainability and security?
Yeah, it's a big question on a global basis. I'd say it's, from a policy standpoint, just generally, it's impossible to answer that without going kind of country by country, quite frankly. But I'd say if I had to generalize, I'd say it's lagging, dramatically lagging. Some countries are doing amazing work, but generally speaking, we're not meeting the moment at any level. And there's efforts. The UN Food System Summit was an effort to try to pull together world leaders and policymakers and industry to chart a course. I think it was didn't reach its potential, put it that way. We'll see what we can build on from there. I think there's windows of hope, but frankly, voters right now, generally around the world, and that I'm just speaking about democracies, aren't voting on these issues. And the reality is policy is not going to be able to fully be manifested in terms of solving these without voters starting to say increasingly, this issue cares to me. Because right now, and after 6 years running policy in the White House on these issues, it's complicated for governments to start going on into food issues in a big way because people don't like the idea generally of governments. Europe is different, but the United States for sure, governments meddling in their food. Although of course governments have been shaping food policy since the beginning, and it's one of the most highly regulated industries there is. But I guess we need a lot more leadership. We need serious policies. The reality is industry has not stepped up to the plate. Both on the health side and on the climate side that it needs to. There's a lot of momentum starting to happen, but it's a bit late and it's definitely not big enough. I think one of the areas that is most important is to start pricing carbon, because I think from a producer side, I think this is going to be the biggest opportunity for producers to increase their revenue. Kind of in the history of ag, but has to be done in a way that really, encourages the right practices. So I think government's starting to really set up carbon market programs and protocols that are serious and not just, thin, because this actually has to sequester the carbon. It can't just be, plant a cover crop and we're good. I think there's a huge opportunity on a global basis there for governments to lead. And schools on the health side is always probably the best investment from a policy standpoint to start anyway. It's not enough on its own, but you can see the mass impact on transforming school nutrition on the lives of young people over the course of their lives, right? It has an immediate impact, but shapes their behaviors for a long, long time. So I would say the two are the just off the top of my head for the globe. But when you're dealing with such a diverse set of issues and countries, it's hard to say what the one thing would be for everybody.
Yeah, I know it's difficult. It's a complex issue. JD, you want to tackle this as well? What is, in your opinion, is the state of food policy, and what in your opinion needs to be done by governments around the world?
I would sort of complement a little bit what Sam has mentioned. He's got more experience in this space, but I'm going to reflect a little bit around my growing up in Africa and then spending a significant part of my career in Asia, in those countries and around the world. It's really around making sure that food systems and food security is part of the political conversation in countries, correct? Making sure that governments have the opportunity to bring industry players together to solve it, and also look after the ag players and farmers in specific. Farmers around the world are faced with different challenges, as Sam mentioned. Every country is significantly different, and each of those needs to be addressed in a different way. And I think that's where we, from an ag input provider and crop sciences or life sciences perspective, can add value. But again, as a player in that space, and be open to innovate with others to help solve problems. We can't solve all the problems globally by one solution. You need to really customize those solutions around the world. I like what Sam mentioned about carbon. We just rolled out last year within Bayer Crop Sciences a program with our growers around carbon, where we actually encourage and incentivize growers to really think about like cover crops, like minimum tillage, conservation tillage, to help them implement practices that help carbon, put it back in the soil, and actually incentivize them to make sure it's a business for them. We rolled that out in the US and Brazil, and it's going pretty well. But again, it's a huge opportunity that's more than just one player. It will take the industry and governments to solve that.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about governments, we've talked about a private sector. Let's talk about us as individuals, the Joe public. What role do citizens have to play in all of this? A big part of this is looking at food and understanding where food comes from, the sources, the supply chains, and ultimately what is on our table, and understanding it better. Just on a personal note, I'm working on a story about upcycling food, which is starting to get some traction. The idea that we take food that is normally thrown away, like banana peels and avocado seeds, and making them into something that's viable. And so part of it is probably changing mindsets of people, I imagine, in terms of using food more sustainably and more responsibly. So I guess what is in your opinion is, what more do people need to do to think more responsibly about food and the impact on the environment? And what are some changes each of us can make, simple changes each of us can make in terms of food choices? I guess, JD, let's start with you.
Yeah, so again, I will share my personal opinion and just talk about it. But I think there's an opportunity here for all of us as end consumers to ask for more sort of transparency on where our food comes from, correct? For some of us, we are driven by finding food that's relatively cheap, correct? We want to feed our families. And if you grew up outside of the US, outside of Europe, food security and food cost prices are some key drivers for you as an end consumer. But also transparency on where food comes from. What is the practices that was used to produce the food, making sure that food is safe, and then more importantly, produced in a very sustainable way. And then what we can do as the end consumer is make sure that we focus on that food waste space, which is one of the things that I have in front of my team to really try to see how we can contribute from an innovation perspective, whether that's shelf life, nutritional value, or just flavor, to get people to consume vegetables and fruits more in a sustainable way, and making sure that we can actually have less food waste.
Sam, I want to turn to you.
In the end, all of our actions definitely add up, and what we eat is the deep expression of our culture. So shifting our culture on some of these, I was also the chef there in the White House, so I had to deal with actually the eating part too. And, you get a deep sense of just how, as a chef, how much food is our very identity, what we care about, what we don't, how we express so much about ourselves. And that is changing, and that has to continue to change. And that will shift norms and behaviors on the food waste. I'd say there's sort of two big buckets for me. Food waste is one of them, and upcycling as a new approach to thinking about food is key. One of the companies that I've been working on for a long time, over 6 years, called Do Good Foods. So we're launching the first product called Do Good Chicken, and it basically collects food that's been about to go to landfill from retailers and upcycles about 160 tons a day per facility. And we're going to build multiple facilities throughout the country, and then turn it into animal feed. So you have the first ever truly carbon reduced chicken product hitting the shelves in come January, and hoping to basically solve retail-based food waste across the country. So there's companies that are starting to trying to solve these problems at scale. And one thing, honestly, that consumers can do is to choose companies that are taking these issues seriously, are really starting to bring products to market that are the solution themselves, and supporting. There's lots of amazing groups doing great work, but we have to choose with our dollars. In companies, the more people start supporting those kind of companies, the more the big guys are going to have to desperately try to figure out how to catch up. And that's how change, sometimes the big guys lead, but oftentimes they see an opportunity. Some young company shows an opening, and that's how then scale happens, is then the big guys come in and say, oh yeah, this is a solution. Let's bring it to scale. And that relationship is really important. So couldn't be more excited about those kind of things. But food waste, in the United States, food waste, 40% of what we produce globally, it's about a third. That's just insane. Can you imagine Exxon pumping out oil to the ground and throwing away a third of it? It just doesn't make any sense. And that's one of the easy ways. So both in supporting brands, but also in our homes, doing a much better job at not throwing away so much food. Have a plan, know what you're buying and how you're going to cook it. Cooking more will help you stop wasting. It's a really important piece. I think the other one, and the glaring one in the system, is in the West, and obviously in the developing world, it's a different ballgame. But in the West, we have to eat less meat, particularly beef. Beef is by far the number one driver of emissions in the food system, and as well as water. And so we just have to reduce our animal protein consumption. And the bigger the animal, the worse the impact. So you can just see how you want to slide down the scale. I say that as a meat eater, and I will always eat some level of animal protein. But that's one thing that everybody can do, is to just reduce that amount of intake. And right there, you're gonna have a really large impact collectively on the footprint of the system globally.
Yeah, just takes a little bit to make a difference, for sure. Let's turn to technology and food innovation. And JD, you touched on this in your remarks. Why do we need to be more open to technology and innovation? I mean, is this going to be how food sustainability and security is technology going to drive that down the road? And how, on a general scale, does that support the global food system, would you say?
Yeah, so I think it's a very good question, Francis. And innovation is going to be part of the solution, I'm correct. But innovation, the way we know innovation, if you look back in this whole food system, food security space, is not going to solve the problem. And Simon also mentioned it. We need a different level of innovation, and we need to have innovation happening at a much faster pace. So similar to climate change, we need to really accelerate the way we develop products and find solutions for growers, but also for the end consumer, and addressing the food waste piece. But I'm going to give maybe a couple of examples on things that we've worked on the last few years and things that is in progress. For example, for the big Midwest corn grower, we are just at the brink of releasing short stature corn. It's really just corn that's much shorter, but it can withstand windstorms. So now you can start thinking about a system that you have less waste in a grower's field, less corn on the ground because of windstorms. You have the ability to get in there with equipment and apply inputs like water and nitrogen in a much more efficient way, and not over fertilize and have runoff into your water systems, and really apply pesticides in a much more responsible way. So one example. The other piece that we've recently invested into as a joint venture is Unfold, which is a startup company that's really focused on the vertical farming space to provide genetics an involving market that's going to allow production of food hyper-local in those food deserts and in countries that are reliant on other parts of the world for food security. So we're also trying to unlock more value there as a partner in that space. And the other couple of things that I want to mention, because I'm really passionate about it based on what my team specifically do in vegetable R&D, is, for example, we're working on shelf life improvements for our vegetable crop, correct? To making sure that we select and develop products much quicker that can actually have a longer shelf life from the moment the grower actually harvests it, as it gets through the packers and the shippers into our kitchens, and it also have a few more days there before it goes to waste so we can consume it. The other really cool thing that the team has recently done, we've released a new tomato variety in India that are much more transportable than the previous varieties we had on the market, and for that matter, the industry. This tomato has the ability now for the whole value chain from the grower to the end consumer to actually have a little bit less food waste, help on that as well. And the last thing is just a big focus for us to make vegetables much more tasty, flavorful, and hopefully much more nutritious in the future. So there's a couple of innovations that's going to help us address it. But again, as I mentioned, we need to really think differently as we go forward, and we need to bring these innovations at a much faster pace to market to solve it, because we cannot respond and find solutions 5, 6, 7 years down the line. Things are moving so fast with climate change, sustainability, and the demand on the food system versus maybe a decade back.
Yeah, in some ways we're already very behind. Isn't that right, JD? So Sam, I want to turn to you. What role do you think food innovation will play? Food innovation and technologies, some of the technologies that JD mentioned, what role do you think they'll play down the road on top of the things that we talked about individual food choices and trying to sustain the food system globally?
I mean, we do not have the tools that we need to manage and be successful in the future that we're facing right now. Basically, our food system has been built in the most stable climate in over the last 100 years that scientists can identify in the history of the world. We just got lucky in terms of us being alive, that we've had a very stable climate that hasn't really changed in 100 years, and we've built a system that is not built for volatility. It's been in many ways gotten off a little scot-free to some extent. And we are now entering an era of dramatic volatility and disruption. And we just simply do not have a system designed to deal with that right now. We have most of our eggs in a few baskets in terms of what we eat, both in terms of kinds of foods. There's only about 12 of them that we're really eating on a massive way. And even then in those lines, the genetic diversity in, say, corn has been completely lost for the most part globally in terms of what's commercially produced. So we're carrying a ton of risk in our system. And I think technology innovation is absolutely essential if we're going to give ourselves a shot at getting through, what we face. That being said, I think there is a lot of hesitancy around technology and how it plays out in our food. And for me, the question is not whether, tools are good or bad. I think that we lose the path when we talk about it that way. We should be asking ourselves whether we want these tools depending on how they're applied and for whom. Genetics is probably embarrassing in the heart of this for a long time. Genetics is probably the most controversial part of, food innovation technology, or one of them. Now we're growing meat indoors, and we got plenty of complicated issues to. The question becomes in the future. There's no resistance to, obviously, GMOs, CRISPR now, and gene editing is here in a major way, has huge potential to transform everything we eat. I think it will. I think the question becomes, in terms of how consumers are going to accept it, is, are we using this technology to apply more chemicals in ag? Or are we using it to say, this broccoli has twice the nutrient density, it's more delicious, it takes less inputs and less water, and it's the best broccoli you're ever going to eat? I think consumers are totally up for that, right? Right now, we've not given them a value proposition in a lot of this technology. That why would they be into that? And so I think the question for all of us as a system is to make sure that we're applying our tools to help not just producers, but also consumers eat better, live better, and for us to be able to nourish as many people as possible as an affordable way as possible. If we do that, I think consumers are going to accept most of the technologies that come to bear. If we don't, there's going to be a lot of resistance, and I think, quite frankly, there should be. So that's, I think, the question. But we have a lot of investment to do if we're going to even come close to grappling with, global droughts, desertification across like most of them areas we're growing most of the food right now will not be high producing areas in 40 years or 50 years. And, that's terrifying. And we're going to have to figure out how to do a better job in those climates, and then how to adjust what we're growing, where we're growing, and how we're growing it. So we got a lot to do.
We have a lot of work to do, and unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time. We just have about a minute left. I hate to try to get you guys to condense so quickly in such a short amount of time. But what are your last words for us about food sustainability? Your vision for the future, and is there hope for sustaining our planet when it comes to food? JD, can I start with you?
Yep, very briefly, I think if you look into the decade ahead, I'm excited, but I'm also nervous because I think we really need to innovate at a much faster pace as an ag industry to provide food that's safe and helps with food security. The other piece is we need to pay much more attention as an industry to sustainability. How do we produce food in a much more sustainable way? And we have a lot of new tools like the digital platforms, data science that can actually help us track and secure that sustainability focus on how we produce products. So the world of innovation is really changing, and making sure that we partner together across the industry to drive innovation and solve these big problems locally, but also at the global scale.
And Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with JD on that. I think, my hope for the future is that we realize that food can solve some of the most pressing challenges that we face, that we prioritize it, and that we focus all of our efforts on producing, food that is much more sustainable, not just sustainable, but actually helping to solve some of these challenges, and do it in a way that people can eat much healthier and live much more fulfilling lives, and make that available for many more people than it is today. And I think we have to do it. And I hope more investment, more attention is paid to the opportunities that sit in this sector than has been to date. And I think if we do so, we can look back and be proud that we actually helped stave off the worst effects of climate and left a better world for our kids. But the time is now. Like, we're out of time. It's not like we got a year. We're like we're way late. So we got to get moving.
Yeah, well, I wish I could talk to you both some more, but unfortunately we're out of time. But thank you both. JD Rossouw with the Bayer Crop Science, and Sam Kass with Acre Venture Partners. I thank you both for joining this discussion today. It's been enlightening. I've learned a lot, and hope we can continue this discussion into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much.